Welcome back, Wastelanders. In our previous video, we had been touring the well. In this video, we're moving into the third and final portion of this complex, the Cortex. Player home / base build for my Fallout 4 AntiHero playthrough. We're joined again by Diesel. I'd like to begin this video by thanking the friends who encouraged me to do this. I had really hoped that a couple of decades of DMing RPGs would have translated into a skill set that would have proven useful for this, but sadly that was not the case. These are quite different beasties, and it's proven to be much more of a challenge than I had anticipated. However, I've been enjoying the challenge, at least up to the point of that 50th, 60th, 100th take on an audio record. However, I am deeply and genuinely appreciative of my friends and their continued support and encouragement. Alright, let's move into the nerve center of the Cortex here. In a moment you'll see that Diesel's proclivity for hoarding is not limited to just power armor. We've got quite the collection of unique and legendary weapons and armor squirreled away safely in here. He doesn't sell anything, really. He's a hoarder, but he's an organized hoarder. Prior to Dr. Wells' psychotic break, he was oftentimes found here, coordinating various projects and research, as well as doing work on his own project. He was singularly focused on decrypting and decoding the complex mathematical formulas found in the music on the classical music station, and had, in fact, after Diesel gained access to all the terminals on this level, managed to put the formula together, discovering that it was teleportation technology, at which point his fascination turned to obsession. Here we are in the weapons lab. A good majority of the work done here was disassembling Institute laser weaponry, studying the tech and trying to use that to improve the Enclave's energy weapon tech. Dr. Wells had managed to move so far into his research that he was able to successfully create a working teleporter. The terminal entries make it unclear what the actual final violent shove over that razor-fine line between genius and insanity that Dr. Wells had been straddling for years was, but the timeline is also a little confusing. But the paranoid delusions that came with it had him convinced that the Institute was aware that he had managed to duplicate their tech and had infiltrated the outpost, and convinced, in fact, that some, if not all, of the personnel had been replaced by synths. He set in motion a plan to eliminate this perceived Institute threat. That was a binary toxin. The first part, which was the compound the medical doctor confronted him about, which set in motion a unfortunate series of events. The Dr. Wells sabotaged the autodock, using it to kill the medical officer and then the teleporter to get rid of the body. But in his fog of madness, after being severely injured in his confrontation with the scientist in the FEV lab, he returned here to repair the damage and was killed by his own sabotaged autodock. The condition of the body, or rather consistency, indicated that he'd added a frappe setting to the autodock. Diesel was able to retrieve the doctor's Pip-Boy and his access card. He'd considered repairing the autodock, but he didn't think he'd ever trust it again. A second quick shout out to Mr. Colonel Mustard and his phenomenal Lima Detachment mod, which allowed me to spawn dupe the autodock into my build. Once again, the link to the mod in the description below. Here we are at Dr. Wells' private quarters, and the first part of the binary toxin was the benign compound that was introduced into the synthetic food supply and later discovered by the medical officer, which would build up like a plaque in the vascular system, but with no other ill effect. The second part was an odorless, tasteless gas released into the ventilation system, of which the molecular structure was so small that it could bypass even the Enclave's power armor filtration system. And once introduced into the bloodstream, it would cause a violent thermal reaction, rapidly elevating the body temperature and causing a severe form of hemorrhagic fever. Dr. Wells was confident that the toxin would eliminate everyone on the outpost level, and that just left the science staff. Well, 3 of the science staff. 1 of them did regularly take his meals in the outpost above. In fact, the science staffer that was filling in for the missing medical officer. However, the other 3 took their meals here in the Cortex at the mess, which we'll get to toward the end of the tour. And Dr. Wells realized he was going to have to eliminate them himself. After a thorough examination of all the bodies, Diesel never did find a single synth component, which doesn't preclude the possibility that the Institute did in fact catch wind of what Dr. Wells had been working on. However, it made the likelihood of that much slimmer. And now we come to the solution to the mystery of where Dr. Wells was disappearing to. We've got an entire hidden facility behind the utilities portion of the Cortex. And here we've got Dr. Wells' private library. When Diesel first discovered this, he couldn't resist. He ended up spending months just poring over all the technical and science volumes, the massive Enclave archive and all the research therein. But he did eventually have to set it aside because he realized that this facility wouldn't be secure until the Institute had been eliminated. Over here we've got his private laboratory where he did most of the work in puzzling out how the teleportation technology worked. Now, Dr. Wells' approach was to utilize the Institute's own frequency. However, when it came to the physical hardware, he was planning on adopting a different approach, a kind of peer-to-peer or point-to-point setup for the equipment that would give him the ability to piggyback on the Institute's signal while remaining virtually undetectable. Diesel wanted to take this a step further, and utilizing Wells' research as well as that of the science staff working on the synths, he found a way to successfully install a synth component into a suit of power armor. And by utilizing the teleportation network, he can basically summon a suit of power armor to himself anywhere in the Commonwealth. Unfortunately, that technique of teleportation leaves one end of the process unfixed, no set point, and that increases the risk of discovery by the Institute, but only by a statistically insignificant amount. And since Diesel doesn't regularly utilize power armor, it would likely only ever be utilized in a emergency sort of situation, and the risk would be almost non-existent. Sadly, until the Institute is eliminated, the full potential of the tactical advantage of teleportation simply won't be realized. And that led him to the next part of the plan, to establish a network of set points for the teleporter. And after exploring and researching, looking into a number of different potential locations, what he finally settled on was Red Rocket. He'd already established a couple of fairly good safe houses in Red Rockets in the Commonwealth, and setting up the rest and installing the set points would be easier than starting from scratch. Here we are in the aforementioned mess hall for the science staff. And Diesel is well aware that his merry little band of cutthroats and degenerates really are no match for the technologically advanced Institute, and with the unforeseen and unpleasant surprise arrival of the Brotherhood of Steel, Diesel now has 2 major factions to deal with. Initially, he'd considered just trying to turn them against each other and then take out what remained. Lately, he's been leaning more towards utilizing the railroad, manipulating the railroad into eliminating both the Brotherhood of Steel and the Institute. Their clandestine methodology meshes well with his own, and has the added bonus that if he can successfully use the railroad to eliminate the Institute, they'll be basically ensuring their own obsolescence. Without the Institute, the need for the railroad becomes moot. There's no point. Although prudence dictates that Diesel will probably eliminate them as well. Anyhow, that brings us to the end of this video. I'd like to thank you for joining me. It's been 3 long videos, and I appreciate your patience. I hope you've enjoyed. As you can see, the Enclave emblem disappearing and reappearing. Sadly, that seems to happen in first person, not in third person, though, thankfully. Anyhow, I hope you've enjoyed. The next video will be on the Red Rocket safe houses. And until then, catchphrase sign off.